Hello students. In earlier session you have already completed body fluids, blood groups, RH factor, blood coagulation and the functions of blood and the lymph. Then you have already learned the types of circulation as open type, closed type. In today's session I'll introduce to you about the human heart and respective blood vessels associated with the heart. In human, circulation is said to be closed type because blood is flowing under pressure through closed blood vessels. It is also known as cardiovascular system, cardio referring to heart, which is pumping organ, which pumps the blood. Under pressure it flows into the blood vessels so that the required components diffuse into the tissue and waste components will diffuse in the blood. As the word circulation indicates, it is unidirectional flow, begin from one point and again comes to the same point. And without any stop, this circulation is maintained specifically in our body. Human heart is said to be myogenic in nature. The muscles which are present in the heart wall are auto-excitable. Under the influence of the hormones, under the medulla oblongata of the brain having cardiac centers, and autonomous nervous system comprises sympathetic nerves and parasympathetic nerves. Both will regulate the functioning of the heart. As it generates its own electrochemical potential, so that muscle undergo contraction and relaxation to maintain unidirectional flow of the blood in the blood vessels. 4-chambered heart we have. It is located in a small space between the two lobes of the lungs in the upper abdomen, known as mediastinum. It is pear-shaped organ. Upper portion is broader, lower portion is narrower and the blunt and slightly tilted towards the left side. It is reddish brown in color, having protection by rib cage, comprises sternum, ribs arising from vertebral column. Inside there is a connective tissue capsule around the heart, known as pericardium, having outer parietal layer, inner visceral layer, and the space between these two membranes filled with pericardial fluid which act like a shock absorber. When you take vertical section passing through heart, we can see the heart wall, which is composed of 3 layers. Epicardium is outer, made up of epithelium and connective tissue. Myocardium is slightly thick, made up of cardiac muscles, and inner endocardium is again thin, made up of epithelium and connective tissue. Internal septa, which divides heart into upper half and lower half, and each upper and lower half again divided horizontally, so that heart will have right part and the left part. So upper portion which receives the blood, lower portion which distributes the blood, right part which carry deoxygenated blood, left part which will carry oxygenated blood, is always separated by a septa derived from endocardium. There are cardiac apertures present within the heart. Aperture between right upper chamber and right lower chamber, cardiac aperture between left upper chamber and left lower chamber. Apertures from the lower half and respective blood vessels are regulated by the flaps. These are also derived from endocardium. As I said, there are 4 chambers in the human heart: atria and ventricles. Atria are thin-walled, smaller compared to ventricles, divided by atrioventricular septum. Now atrium divided into right and left by interatrial septum, ventricle divided into right and left by interventricular septum. Right portion of the heart is slightly bigger than the left portion. Right compartment of the heart having deoxygenated blood and left part of the heart contain oxygenated blood. Okay, so right atrium, left atrium, interatrial septum, right ventricle, left ventricle, interventricular septum, associated with major blood vessels. From upper portion of the body, superior vena cava, and from the leg region, inferior vena cava. These are the two largest veins collecting deoxygenated blood towards the right atrium, while 4 pulmonary veins which will collect oxygenated blood from the lungs and opens into the left atrium. So right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from all body parts, left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. 2 major blood vessels which collects deoxygenated blood are superior and inferior vena cava, and 4 pulmonary veins. Veins usually carry deoxygenated blood. But if you see the definition of vein usually arises from organ, comes to the heart. Vein usually collects the blood from the organs. So considering these definitions, there is an exception to the name pulmonary veins. These are the only veins in human body which collects oxygenated blood. Now, right ventricle distributes deoxygenated blood towards lungs by pulmonary artery. This is the only artery which will distribute deoxygenated blood. At the same time, left ventricle distributes oxygenated blood to all body parts through a largest blood vessel known as aorta. So let us consider 5 major blood vessels one by one. Superior, inferior vena cava, 2 largest veins, collects deoxygenated blood, opens into right atrium. Pulmonary artery arising from right ventricle takes deoxygenated blood towards lungs. From the lungs, oxygenated blood collected by pulmonary veins which opens into the left atrium. Left ventricle distributes oxygenated blood to different body parts through aorta. Now, between right atrium and right ventricle, the aperture guarded by 3 flaps, it is known as tricuspid valve. Left atrium and left ventricle, there is an aperture guarded by 2 flaps, it is bicuspid valve, known as also mitral valve. So tricuspid valve is present at the right side, bicuspid valve is present at the left side, guarding right and left cardiac apertures between atria and ventricles. Semilunar valves, pulmonary semilunar valve, aortic semilunar valve. These are the flaps regulating the apertures between ventricles and respective blood vessels. Now when you see the thickness of the heart wall, it is slightly reduced in the atrial region and thick in the ventricular region. Especially dorsal wall of the ventricle and lateral wall of the ventricles show folded muscles. Thickness is more. So these folded muscles are known as papillary muscles. And from these papillary muscles, the spring-like threads arises known as chordae tendineae. So tips of the tricuspid valve, tips of the bicuspid valve are connected to papillary muscles by spring-like chordae tendineae. Let us revise in short. Human heart is myogenic, 4-chambered, pumping organ, connected to arteries and veins, distributes oxygenated blood, collects deoxygenated blood and give to respective organs for distribution and give to the lungs for oxygenation. Heart externally protected by thoracic cavity composed of rib cage, internally protected by pericardium having pericardial fluid. Heart wall comprises epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. Endocardium will give rise septa and the flaps regulating the cardiac apertures. Atria are receiving chambers, ventricles are distributing chambers. Atria are thin-walled chambers, ventricles are thick-walled chambers. Right atrium receive deoxygenated blood through superior and inferior vena cava. Left atrium receiving oxygenated blood through pulmonary veins. Right ventricle distribute deoxygenated blood towards lungs by pulmonary artery. Left ventricle distribute oxygenated blood to different body parts through aorta. Apart from this, there are special neuromuscular nodes present in the heart wall to generate the stimuli for working of the heart known as cardiac cycle. There is a neuromuscular node present in the right corner of the right atrium. It is known as SA node, sinuatrial node. This SA node gives atrial fibers in the wall of both atria. They are directly or indirectly connected to one more node known as AV node, atrioventricular node, which is present in the right atrium in the left corner. So SA node in the right atrium, right corner, AV node, right atrium, left corner. SA node gives atrial fibers, AV node gives two bundles of His on either side of interventricular septum. So two bundles of His comes down towards the apical region of the ventricle, and then it will move in the lateral walls of the ventricle and gives profuse branching known as Purkinje fibers. So SAN, atrial fibers, AVN, bundle of His, Purkinje fibers. This is known as conduction system of human heart. They regulate contraction wave known as systole, relaxation wave known as diastole. So systolic wave is initiated by SAN and automatically diastolic phase follows systolic phase. Being a single organ heart, when upper half is in systole, lower half is in diastole. When lower half is in systole, upper half is in diastole. Thus, it tries to maintain two blood flows, oxygenated and deoxygenated, towards left and right side respectively. Before the blood distributes to the different body parts, the blood flow enters twice in the heart. That's why heart acts like two pumps, separating two blood flows, maintaining two circuits. The blood flows from heart to lungs, lungs to heart for oxygenation, known as pulmonary circulation. The blood flows from heart to body parts to heart for distribution and collection, comprises systemic circulation. So single organ, two pumps, two circuits, and twice the blood flow enters in the heart. Hence, in human, the mechanism of circulation is said to be double circulation. When the heart is relaxing means it will not take rest. There is no pressure on the heart. The blood flow passively entering into the atria. There is no pressure on the tricuspid and bicuspid valve. Blood flow enters the ventricles. Ventricles start getting full. Half of the atria are full now. The blood level touches SAN, and that is a stimulus for SA node. It vibrates, gives the impulse towards atrial fibers. Impulse received by AV node gives the impulse towards bundle of His and then Purkinje fibers, and as the contraction of ventricles begins, so ventricular systole when it starts, tricuspid and bicuspid valve closes. it produces a sound lub, followed by atrial systole, where semilunar valve will get closed, producing the sound dub. For systolic contraction in the ventricle, lub sound is produced, and for atrial systolic wave, dub sound is produced. So lub and dub, slightly louder and slightly slower sound, comprises one heartbeat, and then again heart relaxes. It is called a joint diastole. So in cardiac cycle there are three phases. Ventricular systole require 0.3 seconds, atrial systole require 0.1 second, joint diastole require 0.4 seconds. So together one cardiac cycle requires 0.8 seconds. Thus human heart will work efficiently, whose working starts in embryonic life at 12th week, and when it stops, the person loses the name. So our liveliness, our name and fame is depending upon the working of the heart. With this, I'll conclude this session under the heading Anatomy and Working of the Human Heart. Thank you.